My name is Steve Moen, and I'm based out of Rockville, Maryland. So I'm an artist in the Washington, D.C. area. And my show is called Across the Gorge and Spaces in Between. The majority of the paintings in my show come from a region of our area just below Great Falls, and it's called the Mather Gorge. And that's a place where the Potomac River has carved a seam through real solid rock over hundreds of thousands of years. And there's many different paths and places you could venture on both sides of the gorge, both on the Maryland side and on the Virginia side. And so that's where I did a lot of my painting. And I had a certain methodology for capturing images in that area. The sizes I paint on, for this show it was miniature painting on flashing. And flashing is something that you'll find roofers put right under the shingles to keep the water from getting into a house, and it comes in big rolls like a ribbon. And so I would cut it in like 6 inches by 7 inches rectangles. I'd sand one side, put gesso on it, and then glue it to a foam pad. And that makes it really easy to travel long distances. And the other thing that facilitates travel through some of these rugged areas is 30 years ago, I made a backpack out of PVC piping, and that allows me to carry my paints and my supplies right on my back, and so I can maneuver just about anywhere. And I cut up 300-pound watercolor paper in small squares, and then I can run to a location and paint there and get back. So I'll have images on small shapes, and then from that I work on big paintings, which can be, up to 4 by 5 feet, and I do that at home in the studio based on the studies that I do. There are a number of paintings like the one in the show announcement that you actually get to by driving to Great Falls on the Virginia side. There's a little teeny trail that you sneak down to get down to where the climbers climb, and that's a pretty steep trail to get down to, but then you see the real hard rock has been polished with real organic smooth surfaces, probably thousands and thousands of years ago, and that's something you can observe and look at, and that's the painting I did, looking at that smooth surface rock, looking out over to the steep cliff which overlooks another part of the gorge. But then on the Maryland side, there are a number of paintings that were done from locations on that side too. I've always had an interest in nature, and years ago I did a lot of fishing, and then for a while on the eastern shore I had a cousin that was a waterfowl hunter, so I would go with him in my 30s just to experience the marsh on the eastern shore. So I've had that interest back then, but now I'm older and I have interest in other ways, like I am a beekeeper. I like to forage for wild mushrooms, and once you learn about fungi, you know fungi is associated to trees, and you'll have a whole mycelium structure underneath the trees where it's basically an internet where trees can basically communicate with other trees. So you start looking at nature in the forest totally different than you ever did before. I would always try to challenge my mind with creating a short haiku for the painting I was doing. And oftentimes I'd be thinking about it in the middle of the night, and the haiku would pop into my mind in the middle of the night, and then I'd have to write it down. And when I neglected to write it down, rarely would I remember it in the morning. Well, I like Finding Self. I like another one called Two Trees, because that was the poem. I like the way that picture developed, but I also like the poem because, assuming trees can communicate with a mycelium under the ground, I imagine those two trees imagining themselves as something else, like one tree imagining themselves as the she-bee forager, which would be the female bee which forages all the honey, and then the other tree imagining that he was the gardener. Say 30 years ago, I was painting portraits and figures with a guy who was a teacher at the Art League here named Peter Thrasher. And he used a real wide spectrum of color. So you get a real vibrant, full color painting out of that method. But from there, I became interested in color as it's visually perceived. It's that whole evolution of understanding color that, brought things together, which is how I paint today. I always liked blue, and that kind of gets into the, that there's something special about the blue tone in the spectrum. It's the shortest wave in the visual colors field. What I've noticed from being in the landscape, all days of the year and all seasons and all times of the day is, depending on the time of the year, the time of the day, your colors change dramatically. Like in the early morning, you're going to see some real vibrant blues because you have a lot of blue coming into your atmosphere, and that's what's bouncing into those shadows, which Leonardo da Vinci said, I think he called them the pools of lesser light, because shadows are what captures the lesser light. But painting is an activity I've done since my late teens, and I've had a lot of hobbies in my life, but this is the one that has really stuck with me throughout a lifetime.